Every night, my husband would lock our 19-year-old daughter's bedroom door. I'd hear the bed creaking for an hour, then absolute silence. When I discovered what he was doing in there, my world collapsed. Hi, my dear ones. God bless each and every one of you on the other side of this screen. My name is Margaret Ellen Sullivan. I'm 52 years old, and I live here in Marietta, Georgia. This charming little town in Cobb County, just northwest of Atlanta, known for our beautiful town square and the annual Taste of Marietta Festival that brings the whole community together. I was born right here, in this blessed land, and this is where I planted my roots. Oh, my dear friends, you don't know how much I love this art of baking. I started about 3 years ago when a neighbor on my street taught me. Mrs. Henderson, God rest her soul, she's passed on now. She used to make these cornbread muffins that were absolutely divine. One day, I was walking past her house and smelled that wonderful aroma coming from her kitchen. Mrs. Henderson, I said, would you teach me how to make those muffins? And she welcomed me with open arms. Every Saturday morning I'd go over there, bring the ingredients, and we'd spend time kneading dough, talking about life, about our children, about our struggles. It was like therapy, you know? Today I make cornbread, biscuits, banana bread, cheese rolls, and there's always extra to share with the neighbors. I love seeing their happy faces when I deliver a warm bag to their door. This morning, before recording this video for you, I just finished a batch of cheddar biscuits. The smell is still filling the whole house. It's a recipe I learned from my mother-in-law, God rest her soul, modified a bit the way Mrs. Henderson taught me. I stand there in the kitchen, hands in the dough, and it feels like all the problems in the world stay outside. And you, my dear friends watching me now, tell me in the comments, what little town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with breakfast, after lunch watching TV, or later in the afternoon when things settle down? I always read all the comments and get so emotional knowing where you're from and when you take time from your busy day to listen to this grandmother's stories from Marietta. Tell me, will you? Let's create a chain of love that goes from Georgia across the entire country. Oh, and don't forget to hit that like button down below and subscribe because I have many more stories to tell you. Hit the bell too, because there's a new video every week from this grandmother. But listen, folks, today I came here to talk to you about something very serious, a situation I lived through years ago that completely changed my life. It's about my daughter, my Julia, and about how sometimes we can live with someone for years and not truly know who they are inside. A story that left me heartbroken, but ultimately brought me a strength I didn't even know I had. Look, my dear ones, for you to fully understand this story, I first need to tell you about my family and what life was like when I was a child, right here in Marietta. I was born in 1973, in a small house on Maple Street, close to the downtown square. My father was named James Sullivan, a strong name, isn't it? And he worked as a construction worker. My mother, Eleanor, took care of the house and us children. There were 4 of us, me, the oldest, then my brother Thomas, 2 years younger, my sister Dorothy, and the baby William. Our house was small, brick with vinyl siding, with 2 bedrooms in front and 2 in back. We had a big backyard where my mother planted her herbs, mint, basil, rosemary, and there was always a peach tree loaded with fruit that was our joy in the summer. I remember as if it were yesterday the mornings in our house. I'd wake up early to the sound of the neighbor's rooster, Mr. Peterson's. My mother was already in the kitchen, turning on the stove to make coffee. The smell of coffee mixed with the aroma of whatever she was baking is a memory I hold dear to this day. She'd always make cornbread or buttermilk biscuits to go with it, and we'd sit at the kitchen table, a small wooden table my father had made himself. My father would leave early for work, always with the lunchbox my mother prepared, a sandwich, some chips, maybe some leftover meatloaf when we had it, and always sweet tea in a thermos. He was a hard-working, honest man, but quite serious. He wasn't much of a talker, you know. But when he came home, he'd always bring us something: candy, a donut he bought at the corner store, or old newspapers that we loved to make paper airplanes with. My childhood was simple, but full of joy. I played a lot with the girls on the street, hide and seek in the late afternoon when the sun was low, hopscotch on the driveway, and my favorite game was playing house. I'd make dollhouses under the peach tree with broken tiles I found around the yard, little stones that became furniture, and big leaves that served as blankets. My best friend was named Patricia. She was the daughter of Mrs. Whitmore, who lived 2 houses down from ours. Patricia had beautiful curly brown hair that her mother always tied with colorful ribbons. We two were inseparable. We'd invent games. We'd make pretend food with mud and leaves, play school. I always wanted to be the teacher and she the student. And when it rained, we'd spend hours on the porch listening to stories Mrs. Whitmore told about the old days when ladies got married in white dresses and veils. At school, which was about 5 blocks from home, I was a good student. I always loved studying. My first-grade teacher was named Mrs. Johnson, a petite lady with white hair always pulled back in a bun, but who had tremendous energy. She taught me with such care that I was enchanted with each new letter I learned. I remember she always said, "Margaret, dear, education is the only inheritance no one can take from you." I'd carry my lunch in a little metal lunchbox that my mother decorated with stickers. Inside, there were always homemade cookies and a thermos with lemonade she made herself. During recess, Patricia and I would sit under the oak tree in the schoolyard and share our lunches. Afternoons at home were full of activities. I'd help my mother with chores, sweeping the porch, feeding the chickens we kept in the backyard, helping fold laundry. I remember carrying the laundry basket, trying to help like the older girls did, and feeling important helping at home. When July 4th came around, our house became a party. My mother made potato salad, coleslaw, baked beans, and my father set up the grill in the backyard. All the neighbors would come to our house, and the kids would wave sparklers until late at night. Mrs. Whitmore always brought her brother-in-law Henry, who played guitar and sang old country songs that made the adults dance in the yard. It was a simple life, but full of love and family unity. My parents, though not overly demonstrative with affection, always took good care of all 4 of us. There was never a lack of food on the table, clean clothes, and especially respect. My father never raised his hand to any of us, and my mother always raised us with dignity and values. But like every family has its peculiarities, ours did too. There was something I noticed from a young age, but only fully understood years later when I was an adult and a mother myself. It was about relationships, about how people can hide dark sides behind smiles and kind words. A painful lesson that only life itself can teach. In those childhood years, running through the backyard and playing under the peach tree, I had no idea how much I would need that solid foundation my parents gave me to face the challenges that were coming. My dear ones, now I need to tell you how everything started to change in my life. It was 1991, I had just turned 18, and that was the year I met Robert. He was 26 years old, a construction foreman here in Marietta, very respected in town. Everyone knew his work. Robert Davenport was his full name. He built several houses in the new subdivisions that were popping up at the time. I met him at a wedding reception for Mr. Henderson's daughter at the church hall downtown. I remember I was wearing a light blue dress that my mother had sewn especially for the party. She always had magic hands for sewing. Robert was there, very elegant, in dress pants and a crisp white shirt. He was handsome, tall, dark hair always well combed with gel, and he had a way of speaking that impressed everyone. When he came to talk to me, I got all shy. "Miss, may I have the pleasure of knowing your name?" he said, even taking off his hat. Such manners, right? My mother, who was beside me, was so proud. "This is my daughter Margaret," she answered for me, because I was speechless from shyness. Robert started visiting me at home every Sunday after church. My father liked him from day one. "This young man is a hard worker, Margaret," my father would say. "Not some bum wasting your time." Robert always brought something. Candy for me, a pack of cigarettes for my father, and always greeted my mother with great respect. During our courtship, He was too perfect. Too perfect, you know? Today I understand that when someone is too perfect, something's wrong. But back then, at 18, I thought I'd found my prince charming. Robert was never late for dates, always well-dressed, always with a rose or chocolates for me. He talked about our future so lovingly. "Margaret, when we get married, I'm going to build you a beautiful house. It'll have 2 bedrooms, a large living room, a spacious kitchen where you'll make your cakes." We got married in March 1993. I was 20, he was 28. The wedding was small but nice, at the same church hall where we met. Robert had kept his promise. He built our new house in the Kennesaw subdivision, right here in the area. It was beautiful. White with blue shutters, with a big backyard where I planted my herbs and flowers. The first months of marriage were like a dream. Robert was affectionate, attentive, took me to the movies when there was a new film, bought me nice fabric to make dresses. I was on cloud 9. I took care of the house with so much love, made the foods he liked. He always loved fried chicken with gravy and meatloaf with mashed potatoes. It was in September 1995 that my Julia was born. Oh, my dear ones, what joy it was when I brought that girl into the world. Robert got so emotional he cried at the hospital door. "Margaret, you gave me the most precious thing in the world," he said, holding our baby girl so carefully. But it was exactly after Julia's birth that I started noticing certain changes in Robert. At first, I thought it was all in my head, you know. Those normal fatherly jealousies. He'd watch too closely when I bathed the baby, when I changed her diaper. "Margaret, don't you think you're taking too long in the room with Julia?" he'd ask, somewhat impatiently. Julia grew up beautiful, smart, but always very quiet. She wasn't a rowdy child like others. Even as a toddler, she had a withdrawn manner that caught my attention. When she turned 2 and started talking, it was always softly, as if afraid to bother anyone. "Mommy," she'd say whispering, pulling on my skirt. She was too obedient, you know? Too obedient. Robert started getting more controlling with me, too. "Margaret, you don't need to go to your mother's house so much," he'd say. "A wife's place is at home, taking care of the family." At first I accepted it, thought it was care, that he loved me so much he wanted me all to himself. My foolishness, right? When Julia turned 5, in 2000, Robert insisted she not go to daycare. "The girl is better at home with you, Margaret. Those daycares are full of diseases, badly behaved children." I thought it was strange, because all the neighborhood mothers put their children in daycare so they could learn to interact with other kids. But he was so convincing that I agreed. Julia grew increasingly withdrawn. When she had little friends over, she'd always play somewhat apart. And the worst, every time Robert came home from work, she'd run to our room and hide. "Julia is afraid of men," I'd tell myself. "It's just a shy child thing." It was when she was 8 that I started noticing stranger things. Robert had created a routine of talking with Julia every night. "Margaret, I'm going to talk to the girl about school, about behavior," he'd say after dinner. And off he'd go to her room, close the door, and stay there for a long time. At first, I thought it was nice. What a dedicated father, I'd think. He's teaching our daughter about life. But there was something that bothered me. Julia would always be very quiet during these conversations. I'd be in the kitchen washing dishes or ironing clothes, and it was a strange silence coming from the room. One night, when Julia was 9, I decided to pay more attention. Robert had just entered her room and closed the door as always. I finished putting away the dishes and went to our bedroom, which was on the wall next to Julia's room. I pressed my ear to the wall, and what I heard made my heart race. It was a rhythmic sound, like someone tapping on the bed, but tapping slowly, in a constant rhythm. And along with that sound, I heard Robert's voice speaking low. "That's right, stay still. It's for your own good." My God, my mind went to the most terrible place. Could my husband be? No, it couldn't be. Robert was an upstanding man, hard-working, respected. He must be teaching Julia something, maybe showing her a book, some exercise. But that rhythmic sound, that "stay still," my heart was pounding. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, until Robert came out of the room an hour later. When he entered our bedroom, I tried to act natural, pretending I was arranging clothes in the closet. "Robert," I said, trying to sound casual, "what were you teaching Julia today?" "Oh, we talked about respect, about obedience," he replied, already taking off his shirt. "The girl needs to learn from an early age to behave properly." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing in bed, thinking about that strange sound, those words, and especially thinking about Julia's behavior lately. Always looking down, always scared, always avoiding looking at her father. The next day, when Robert left for work, I tried to talk to Julia. "Honey, what does Daddy talk to you about in the room?" I asked, while she ate breakfast. Julia stopped chewing, stared at her plate, and then whispered, "He teaches me things that girls need to know, Mommy." "What kind of things, my love?" "Things about how to be obedient, how not to bother anyone." There was something in her voice, in the way she averted her gaze, that worried me even more. But I still couldn't imagine the terrible truth that was to come. I still believed my husband was a good man, and that my mind was creating fantasies where there was nothing more than a strict father educating his daughter. How wrong I was. How terribly wrong. My dear ones, what I'm about to tell you now are the most difficult years of my life. After that first night, when I heard those strange sounds, my life became a hell of doubts and fears. For months, every night was the same torture. Robert would enter Julia's room, lock the door, and I'd be there in the kitchen or in our room, heart in my throat, trying to understand what was happening. Julia grew up, but it wasn't normal growth, you know. When she turned 10, I started noticing something different about her development. At school, teachers kept calling me in for meetings. "Mrs. Sullivan," said Mrs. Crawford, who was her fourth-grade teacher, "Julia has a lot of difficulty concentrating. She always seems to be in her own world." That's when I took her to Dr. Morrison, that old doctor here in Marietta, who practiced at the clinic on South Cobb Drive. After several tests and conversations, he explained, "Mrs. Sullivan, your daughter has what we call ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. That's why she has so much difficulty in school, always seems distracted." When I told Robert, he got furious. "Doctors don't know anything, Margaret. The girl doesn't have any illness. What she has is lack of discipline, of firm education. That's why I talk to her every night, to bring order to that head." And these conversations kept getting longer, more frequent. It wasn't just at night anymore. On Saturday mornings, when I went to the grocery store, Robert stayed home with Julia. "Go on, Margaret. I'll take the opportunity to give the girl some important lessons." When I returned, I'd find Julia always very quiet, sometimes with red eyes from crying. "Julia, why are you crying, my love?" "It's nothing, Mommy. It's just that Daddy explained some things to me, and I got sad." "What kind of things?" "He said I'm different from other girls, that I need to learn to accept the things life brings, even when it hurts." My God, how does a 10, 11-year-old child say something like that? "Even when it hurts," she said. That phrase hammered in my head for weeks. I started noticing other details. Julia always had little marks on her legs. When I asked, she'd say she'd fallen at school, that she'd bumped into the corner of a table. But there were too many falls, too many bumps, and always on her legs, always in places her school uniform covered. Once, she was in the bath, and I went in to bring a towel. I saw purple marks on her back, like welts. "Julia, what's this on your back?" "Oh, Mommy, I fell off Patricia's bike." The neighbor's daughter had a bike the girls played with. But Patricia lived far from home, and Julia almost never left the house to play. Something wasn't adding up. I went to talk to Patricia's mother, Mrs. Whitmore. "Sarah, has Julia been playing a lot on Patricia's bike?" "Oh, Margaret, I haven't seen Julia at our house in a long time." The girl hardly goes out, right? There it was. Julia had lied. Another lie to cover something. But cover what? The worst was at night. Every single night, the same routine. Robert finished dinner, took a walk in the backyard, lit a cigarette, and then said, "Margaret, I'm going to talk to the girl." And off he'd go to Julia's room, with that key in his hand, to lock the door from inside. I'd stay in the kitchen, washing dishes, but with my ears alert. I'd always hear that rhythmic sound, like someone hitting something. And Robert's voice, always low, always controlled. "This is for you to learn. You need to understand this is for your own good. Stop whimpering and stay still." One night, I couldn't take it anymore. It was 2006. Julia was 11. Robert had been in her room for about 20 minutes. I left the kitchen and went to the room door. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard clearly, whack, whack, whack. It was a dry sound like wood hitting something, and along with it, Julia's muffled crying. It wasn't loud crying, it was soft sobbing, like someone trying not to make noise. "Stop crying. This here is to take the laziness out of your body, for you to learn to be a decent person." My blood ran cold. He was hitting my daughter. Robert was beating Julia with something, in the locked room. That's why the rhythmic sound, that's why the marks on her body, that's why she lived so scared. I ran to our room, sat on the bed, and started shaking. My legs turned to jelly. My husband, the man I loved, was torturing our daughter every night. And I, idiot that I was, thinking he was educating her. When Robert came out of Julia's room an hour later, he entered our bedroom as if nothing had happened. He was even humming softly. "Robert," I said, trying to disguise the tremor in my voice, "what do you do in Julia's room every day?" "I already explained, Margaret. Educating that girl. She's hard-headed, needs a firm hand. My father raised me this way, and I became a good man. If I don't give her some corrections, she'll become a tramp." "But what kind of corrections?" "Some spankings. Nothing major. A child without discipline becomes nothing in life." Spankings. He called it spankings. But I had clearly heard the sound of wood hitting, had seen the marks on Julia's body. Those weren't spankings. It was systematic beating, planned torture. From that night on, I couldn't live in peace anymore. Every day was agony waiting for the time Robert would go to Julia's room. And every night, I'd hear my daughter suffer silently on the other side of the wall. I tried to talk to her several times, but Julia was so scared she wouldn't say anything. "My love, if Daddy is doing something that hurts you, you can tell me." "No, Mommy, Daddy just teaches me to be obedient. He said if I tell anyone, it'll be worse for me." That's it. Now I was certain. Robert had threatened my daughter to keep her quiet. And Julia, with that attention deficit, with that innocence, didn't understand she could ask for help. The years went by, and Julia grew up somewhat damaged by life, you know? At 15, she could barely concentrate to study. She repeated 7th grade twice. Teachers always said she was intelligent, but lived in her own world, always scared. Of course she was scared. The poor girl was beaten every day at home. At 17, 18, Julia still seemed like a child. Because of ADHD and all those years of fear, she never managed to develop properly. She depended on me for everything. I chose her clothes, I combed her hair, I did her college assignments. Because Robert had gotten her a spot in an education program at a local college here in Marietta, but she could barely follow the classes. "Margaret," Robert would say, "if it weren't for me, this girl would be nothing in life. I'm the one who brings order to her head. You're too soft, too lenient. That's why I need to be firm." Firm. He called it being firm. But I knew that every night, my 19-year-old daughter was still beaten like a child, in the locked room, with something wooden that Robert hid I don't know where. And the worst part, I didn't have the courage to do anything. I was afraid of Robert, afraid of breaking up our family, afraid of not being able to support Julia and myself alone. It was cowardice on my part, I know. But fear paralyzes us in a way only those who've lived it understand. until the day came when I could no longer pretend not to see. The day I discovered exactly what my husband did to our daughter and how it was much worse than I imagined. My dear ones, the most difficult moment to tell has arrived. It was a Monday in March 2014. I remember exactly because it was my sister Dorothy's birthday, and I had spent the whole day making a pound cake to take to her house that weekend. Julia was 19, but seemed like a 12-year-old girl by the way she behaved, always clinging to me, always asking for help with anything. That day, something happened that I'll never forget. Robert came home from work earlier than usual, around 4 in the afternoon. He was visibly irritated, huffing, throwing things anywhere. "Margaret, where's Julia?" he asked, not even greeting me. "She's in her room studying," I replied. "Studying nothing! Her college professor called me at work today, humiliating me in front of the crew. Said Julia didn't turn in an assignment, that she's missing classes, that she doesn't pay attention to what the professor says. Made me furious." My heart already raced. When Robert got angry like that, things got worse for Julia, much worse. "Robert, calm down. You know she has difficulties because of her condition." "Condition nothing. The problem is, you spoil this girl too much. But today, she's going to learn what real respect means." He went to his room, our room, and I heard him rummaging through something in the closet. My blood froze. That's where he kept that instrument he used to beat Julia. I'd never seen exactly what it was, but knew it was hidden behind our clothes. Robert came out of the room with a face I'd never seen before. It wasn't just anger, it was coldness, cruelty that made me tremble from head to toe. He went straight to Julia's room. "Julia, get up and come here with me, now!" "But Dad, I was study." "Now, I said." The shout was so loud even the neighbors must have heard. Julia came out of the room crying, already knowing what was coming. Robert pushed her into her room and slammed the door so hard the whole house shook. I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. What happened next was hell on earth, my dear ones. It was as if Robert had completely lost control. The sounds coming from inside were much more violent than usual. Whack! 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 But now they were stronger blows, more frequent, along with Julia's muffled screams. I was in the kitchen, washing the same dishes for the 5th time, trying to do something to keep from going crazy, hearing my daughter being beaten like that. But suddenly, I heard a scream that chilled my soul. "Dad, please, I can't take it anymore. Please, stop." It was Julia screaming loud for the first time. She always endured silently, but now she was begging. And Robert responded with a voice that didn't seem human. "Shut up! You're going to learn today what happens to those who disrespect me." Whack, 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 whack. The blows became even more violent. I heard Julia cry desperately, sobbing. It was a cry of physical pain, of total despair. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to the room door and started pounding. Robert, stop that. You're really going to hurt the girl. Get out of here, Margaret. This is none of your business. Robert, she's my daughter too. Open this door. You stay out there until I'm done." People, I never felt so small, so useless in my life. My daughter was being tortured on the other side of that door, and there I was, standing like a statue, not knowing what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what if Robert found out? What if he did worse to Julia? What if he hit me too? Fear paralyzed me completely. I stayed there, leaning against the hallway wall, crying softly and hearing my daughter suffer. After almost 2 hours, Robert finally opened the door. He came out sweating, panting, as if he'd done heavy work. He didn't even look at me. He went straight to the bathroom to shower. When I heard the shower turn on, I ran to Julia's room. My God, what I saw there destroyed me completely. Julia was lying face down on the bed, trembling, with her shirt torn on the back. Her legs were full of red marks, and she could barely move. "My daughter, my dear daughter." Julia couldn't even speak properly. She just cried and trembled. I picked her up. Even at 19, she was thin, weighed like a child, and took her to my room. I gave her a painkiller, put a damp cloth on the marks, and stayed there, stroking her hair until she fell asleep. That night, while Robert snored beside me as if nothing had happened, I stayed awake thinking about something terrible. What if one day he kills my daughter? What if in one of these beatings he goes too far and kills her? It was at that moment I made the most important decision of my life. It was March 2014, and cell phones with cameras were becoming common. I had just gotten a smartphone from my brother Thomas, one of those Samsung phones with a good camera. Back then, it was new to have a phone that recorded video. The next day, while Robert worked and Julia was at college, I kept thinking about her room. I looked at every corner, trying to imagine where I could hide my cell phone in a way that would film the bed without Robert noticing. The bookshelf. Julia had a bookshelf full of college textbooks right across from the bed. If I placed the phone between the books, with the lens pointed at the bed, maybe I could film what really happened in there. But I was afraid. What if Robert discovered? What if he saw the cell phone? What if he became even more violent? On the other hand, I needed proof. I needed to see with my own eyes what my husband did to our daughter. Because part of me still couldn't believe it was as bad as it seemed. Part of me still hoped it was just spankings, that my head was exaggerating. How wrong I was. How terribly, painfully wrong. The decision was made. At the next opportunity I had, I was going to discover the whole truth. And this truth would show me a monster I never imagined existed in my own home, sleeping in my own bed. My dear ones, after that terrible night in March, it took me another week to have the courage to put my plan into action. A whole week where I kept looking at my Samsung phone in the kitchen drawer, thinking, Margaret, you need to do this. It's the only way to know the truth and save your daughter. During that week, I observed Robert with completely different eyes. I saw how he acted normally during the day, greeting neighbors with that wide smile, talking about football with Mr. Peterson from next door, complaining about gas prices at the Shell station. And I wondered how that same man transformed into a monster every night. It was haunting to realize how he managed to maintain that perfect facade. I also observed how Robert interacted with other people during the day. When he met Mrs. Whitmore at the grocery store, he always asked about her grandchildren, complimented the pound cake she made to sell. With the work crew, I'd hear him talking on the phone politely, solving problems, being respectful. How can it be, I thought? How can this same man be so cruel to his own daughter? I watched my daughter with painful attention during those days. Julia barely looked me in the eyes during meals. When I tried to talk about college, about professors, about friends, she always responded with monosyllables. Okay, Mom. Yes, Mom. I don't know, Mom. It was as if she'd learned that the less she spoke, the less trouble she'd have. I noticed things that had previously gone unnoticed, like how Julia always sat sideways in chairs, never fully supporting her back, how she avoided wearing tight jeans, always preferring loose clothing, how she limped slightly in the first hours of morning but tried to disguise it when she noticed I was watching. I also noticed her silent rituals. Every morning when she woke up, Julia would stand still at the edge of the bed for a few minutes, as if mentally preparing to face another day. She always showered with the door locked, something she didn't do when she was younger. And especially, she never hummed while tidying her room anymore, like she did as a child. On the Wednesday of that observation week, something happened that confirmed I was on the right path. I was preparing lunch when I heard Julia crying softly in her room. I went there and asked what had happened. Nothing, Mommy. I was just studying about child development, and there was a chapter about children who suffer violence at home. It made me sad. Sad why, my daughter? Because it must be horrible to live in fear inside your own home, right? Having nowhere to run. Those words completely chilled me. She wasn't talking about the cases in the book. She was talking about her own life. On Thursday of the following week, Robert left for work, as always, at 6 in the morning. He had to go to a new construction site starting in the Kennesaw area, a large 2-story house for Dr. Peterson's family, who was a dentist here in Marietta and always hired Robert for jobs because he trusted the quality of his work. Julia only had classes in the afternoon that day, from 2 to 6. It was the perfect opportunity. I had breakfast with her. We talked about college subjects. Julia was taking didactics and educational psychology that semester. "Mom, did you know there are several types of intelligence? It's not just being good at math or English," she said, animated for the first time in a long time. "Really, honey? Tell Mom." "There's emotional intelligence, bodily intelligence, musical intelligence." The professor said each child has a different way of learning. I looked at my girl talking about education with such care and thought, how does Robert not see our daughter's intelligence? How does he only see flaws in such a special girl? After Julia left for college at 1:30 in the afternoon, I stood for over half an hour in the living room, breathing deeply, gathering all the courage I needed. I picked up my rosary, said 3 Hail Marys, and asked for protection from Our Lady. "Blessed Mother, give me strength to discover the truth and protect my daughter. Thy will be done." My heart was racing when I finally grabbed my cell phone and went to her room. I stood for about 5 minutes at the door, looking inside that space that should be peaceful for a 19-year-old girl, but had become a place of torture. "My God, give me strength," I murmured, making the sign of the cross. "Help me discover the truth and protect my daughter." I entered the room and observed every detail with heightened attention. The bookshelf was right in front of the bed, in a perfect position to film everything. Julia had always been very studious, despite the difficulties ADHD brought. She had books about child education, didactics, learning psychology, cognitive development. They were thick, heavy books she bought, used at the book fair that happened every month at the town square. I chose 2 very thick volumes, Early Childhood Education and Cognitive Development in Children, and created a perfect little space between them. I tested the angle several times, positioning and repositioning the phone until I was absolutely certain the lens was pointing exactly at the bed. I set the phone to record video at the highest quality possible, checked if there was enough battery, it was charged 100%, put it on silent mode so it wouldn't make any noise when it started recording, and even tested for a minute to see if the audio captured the room sounds well. I still remember exactly the thought that went through my head at that moment. "Margaret, after this recording, your life will never be the same. If what you suspect is true, you'll have to make very difficult decisions. If not, at least you'll have peace of mind." Either way, I couldn't stand living in that terrible uncertainty anymore. Done, I thought, after positioning everything perfectly and starting the recording. Tonight, I'll discover what really happens in here. May God give me strength to handle what I'm going to see. I left the room and left everything exactly as it was before. I tidied the house, ironed clothes, prepared lunch ingredients. But everything I did was on autopilot. My head couldn't stop thinking about the phone there, recording the silence of the room, waiting for night to come. The day passed slowly, like an eternity. Every time I looked at the kitchen clock, it seemed time had stopped. I prepared lunch with all care: navy beans well seasoned with herbs from the garden, salt-cured ham properly soaked, boiled potatoes with a clove of garlic, and banana pudding that Robert always said was the best in Marietta, trying to act natural but with nerves on edge. During lunch, I observed Robert eating and talking normally. He was worried about the schedule for the new construction, explaining that Dr. Peterson wanted everything done in 4 months to have a birthday party for his wife in the new house. "Margaret, you can't imagine the size of this house. It'll have 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a pool. It's really big money." I listened to him talking about work, about money, about plans for the coming months, and thought, is this man here planning the future, the same one who tortures our daughter every night? The dissociation was so perfect, it was frightening. Julia came back from college at 6:30 in the afternoon, carrying a folder full of photocopies and notes. She always tried to study hard, poor thing, even with all the concentration difficulties she faced. She told me she'd had an interesting class about literacy methods, that the professor had shown different techniques to teach children with special needs. "Mom, the professor said each child has their own pace, their own way of learning. That we can't force them all to be the same," Julia said, putting books in her backpack. "That's true, honey. Each person is unique, has their qualities," I replied, thinking about how Robert never managed to understand that. I watched her from afar, seeing how she behaved in her own room. It was sad to notice how she avoided staying in bed too long, always preferring to study in the small chair near the window. When she needed to get something from the headboard, she did it quickly and left right away. Now I understood why. That bed had become a place of suffering for her. Robert arrived from work at 5:30, as always, with clothes dirty from cement and red dust. He'd spent the day supervising the beginning of the foundation for the new house, instructing the laborers on how to prepare concrete properly. He was tired, complaining about the March heat that already announced the coming summer. He took a long shower, humming a country song that played a lot on the radio at that time. He put on blue shorts and a clean white t-shirt, and came to dinner as if it were just another completely normal day in our family. During dinner, he was even in good spirits, telling stories about problems with construction suppliers. "Margaret, can you believe the sand guy wants to push substandard material on me?" I told him, "Mr. Wilson, do you think I'm an idiot? That sand won't even work for a sandbox. If Dr. Peterson sees a badly plastered wall, he'll never hire me again." I laughed at his stories, participated in the conversation, asked about the other workers, but inside I was terribly nervous. I thought, in a little while this same man who's here telling jokes is going to transform into a monster, and this time I'll have proof of everything. After dinner, around 8 o'clock, came the usual routine. Robert got up from the table, pushed his chair back, went to the backyard to light his Marlboro cigarette. He stayed there about 10 minutes, looking at the starry sky, taking slow drags, as if mentally preparing for what was coming. When he came back inside the house, that's when he said those words I already knew by heart, but this time made me freeze to my bones. "Margaret, I'm going to talk to the girl." "Okay, Robert." This time, I managed to completely disguise my anxiety. I stayed at the table, finishing my coffee as if it were just another normal night. But internally, it was as if there was a drum beating in my chest. I stayed in the kitchen organizing pans, but with all my senses alert to every sound coming from the hallway. I heard Robert enter our room first. He always went there to get that damned instrument he kept hidden. Then I heard his heavy footsteps through the house's wooden hallway, which always creaked on that loose board near the bathroom. Julia's room door opened with that characteristic squeak of the hinge that needed oil, and finally the dry sound of the key turning in the lock. People, I was never so nervous, and at the same time so determined in my life. My hands trembled washing the same plates for the 4th time, but my mind was focused on one thing. The phone is recording. I'll finally know the whole truth. No matter how terrible it is, I need to see with my own eyes. The terrible routine began as always. First, about 15 minutes of almost total silence. Robert must have been giving his usual instructions to Julia, preparing her for what was coming. I could only hear a low murmur of his voice, but couldn't understand the words. It was always like this. He spoke low, she responded with monosyllables, and then the torture began. Then the sounds I already knew so well started, but this time had a completely different meaning. Whack, whack, whack. With each blow I heard, I thought, it's being recorded. It's being recorded. Finally, there will be proof. Instead of just feeling despair, I also felt a strength growing inside me, a determination I'd never experienced before. Hold on, Margaret, I thought, drying the same plates over and over. Your daughter will be free after tonight. This man will pay for everything he did. An hour and 15 minutes later, I mentally timed every minute of that torture. Robert finally came out of Julia's room. He came to the kitchen walking slowly, as he always did after these sessions. He washed his hands in the sink with that bar soap on the windowsill, dried them with the dish towel, and said with the utmost naturalness in the world, "The girl is learning properly. Today she was well behaved, didn't give any trouble. I think she's finally understanding things." "That's good, Robert," I replied, feigning interest while my stomach turned with disgust. How could he talk like that, as if torturing a 19-year-old daughter was completely normal? Robert went to our room to watch TV, some crime show that always aired at 9. I heard him turn on the television, find the channel, and start laughing at the show's segments. It was surreal. The same man who had just tortured our daughter was there, relaxed, enjoying television. I waited another half hour, hearing him laugh at the show, until I was absolutely certain he was completely distracted. Then, with my heart in my throat and shaky legs, I went to Julia's room. I knocked lightly on the door. "Julia, my love, can I come in?" "You can, Mommy," came her weak voice, muffled by the pillow. I entered and found her lying on her side in bed, still dressed, but clearly hurt. She tried to sit when she saw me, but grimaced in pain and lay back down. "How are you, honey?" "I'm fine, Mommy. Just a little tired from college today." Lie. She wasn't fine at all. But after so many years living that horrible situation, Julia had learned perfectly how to hide pain, to lie to protect me too. I stayed there chatting a few minutes with her about the day's classes, about the coming week's assignments, until I was sure Robert wouldn't come investigate what we were talking about. Then, with extreme care, I approached the bookshelf and got my cell phone back, disguising it as if I were just moving books to arrange them. My God, I thought, looking at that little device that now held definitive proof of what happened in my house every night. Now I'll know the whole truth, however terrible it may be. I went back to the kitchen, told Robert I was going to finish cleaning up from dinner and organize pans for the next morning's breakfast. I locked the kitchen door from inside, something I never did, but I needed total privacy to watch that video. With hands trembling so much I almost dropped the phone on the floor, I opened the video file. The screen loaded for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, and then it started playing the footage that would change my life forever. My dear ones, what I saw in those 43 minutes of recording destroyed me completely. Destroyed me in a way I never imagined possible. Never, not in my worst nightmares, did I imagine so much cruelty, so much coldness, so much pure evil was possible inside my own home. The video showed Robert entering the room with a piece of wood in his hand. It wasn't a thin rod. It was a thick board, about the width of a broom handle, but rectangular, sanded, that he must have gotten from some construction site and prepared especially for this. It was a torture instrument custom made. Robert ordered Julia to lie face down on the bed and take off her shirt. And then, with the coldness of a butcher, with a calmness that chilled me to the soul, he began to hit my daughter's back and legs. They weren't educational spankings. They were violent blows, calculated, methodically distributed across her body as if it were a job he had to complete. And the worst part, while he hit, he talked. He didn't yell, didn't get agitated, didn't show anger. He spoke low, with a frightening calmness, as if giving a lesson. "This is for you to learn what real discipline is. Whack! This is to take the laziness out of your body. Whack! Your mother is too soft with you. That's why I have to do the job right. Whack! If you don't learn now, you'll become lost like other girls your age. Whack! Julia cried softly, trying to muffle her moans of pain in the pillow, writhing with each blow. And Robert continued, systematically, hitting every part of her body that wouldn't show when she wore clothes. When she tried to move to escape the pain, he held her by the hair with one hand and continued hitting with the other. Stay still. If you move, it'll be worse, much worse. People, I was watching my own husband torture my daughter with the coldness of a professional executioner. It wasn't loss of control. It wasn't momentary anger. It was pure sadism, planned, executed with terrible precision. Robert felt pleasure in causing pain, in having total control over another person. The video lasted 43 full minutes. 43 minutes of systematic, cruel, inhuman torture. At the end, Robert put away the damned wood behind Julia's own closet. That's where he kept the instrument hidden, not in our room as I thought, and left calmly, leaving my daughter thrown on the bed, trembling with pain and terror. When the video ended, I ran to the bathroom and vomited. I threw up everything in my stomach, and then continued dry heaving from so much disgust. My body completely rejected that horrible reality. I sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried like I'd never cried in my life. But along with the crying and disgust came something I hadn't felt in years. Courage, a furious courage, determined, relentless. It wasn't just sadness I was feeling. It was anger. A righteous anger of someone who finally understood they had to act, whatever the cost. I went back to the kitchen, grabbed my cell phone with hands still trembling, entered the file menu, and sent that video to the cloud, to Google Drive that my brother Thomas had taught me to use a few months earlier. Then I saved a copy to my email and even sent it to myself on WhatsApp. If Robert discovered and broke my phone, the video would still be safe in 3 different places. The next morning, Friday, Robert left early as always, at 6 o'clock sharp, to get to the construction site before the other workers. As soon as I heard him turn the corner with that characteristic sound of his truck, I grabbed the house phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Hello, police. I need to report a very serious crime. My husband has been torturing our daughter for years, and I have filmed proof." The operator immediately connected me to the detective on duty. I explained the situation in full detail, and he said in a serious voice, "Ma'am, can you come to the station today? Bring the footage and your daughter's ID. We'll arrange for immediate arrest." "Yes, I can. I'll be there right away." I woke Julia, who was sleeping deeply because of the medicine I'd given her the night before. I quickly explained what had happened, that I'd filmed everything, that we were finally going to be free. At first, she was desperate. "Mommy, what if Dad finds out? What if he gets even angrier? What if he does worse to me?" "My dear daughter, there won't be any more anger. Today your father will be arrested for torture. This is over. Over forever, my love." Around 10 in the morning, Julia and I were at the Marietta Police Department in a small room with air conditioning that didn't work quite right. I showed the complete video to Detective James Richardson, a man about 50 years old, serious, who was visibly shocked and outraged by what he saw. "Ma'am," he said after watching about 10 minutes, "I don't need to see anything more. This is a very serious case of assault and qualified torture. We're going to issue a warrant for preventive detention immediately. This man is a danger to society." 2 hours later, while Robert was having coffee at the construction site where he worked, surrounded by fellow workers and helpers, 3 police cars arrived with sirens on. 6 officers got out, and Detective Richardson personally made the arrest. "Robert Davenport? You're under arrest for aggravated assault and torture of a minor." Robert tried to resist, shouted that it was all lies, that I was crazy, that I'd set a trap for him. But when the officers showed they had the video as irrefutable proof of the crime, he went completely silent, turned white as paper. The entire neighborhood, the construction workers, everyone saw Robert leaving in handcuffs, being placed in the back of the patrol car like a common criminal. Everyone talked about it for weeks. Who would have thought Robert, so hardworking, so respected, was such a monster inside his home? And so, that Friday in March 2014, after nearly 20 years of silent suffering, my daughter was finally free. We were free. And Robert, for the first time in his life, was going to answer for the cruel acts he committed against our family. My dear ones, today, 11 years after that Friday that changed our lives forever, I can say we're living in peace. True peace. I'm 52 years old, my Julia is 30 now, and our life here in Marietta is simple, but full of joy. Robert was sentenced to 12 years in prison for torture and aggravated assault. He served 8 years at a Georgia state prison and was released in 2022. When we learned he'd been released, Julia and I were nervous, but he never showed up here again. We heard through others that he moved to another state, far from Georgia. And may he be happy far from us. Today I live in the same house in the Kennesaw subdivision where everything happened, but I transformed it completely. I painted it light yellow, a cheerful color that brought new life to the walls. I moved all the furniture around, especially in Julia's room. Where her bed used to be, there's now a beautiful study desk I bought when she went back to school. Because my Julia, my dear ones, managed to graduate. Yes, she completed her education degree in 2018, 4 years after her father's arrest. It was difficult because the trauma had greatly affected her concentration, but with psychological counseling and lots of love, she succeeded. Today she works as a teacher's aide at a preschool here in downtown Marietta. The pay is modest, but she loves what she does. Seeing Julia working with children is an emotion I can't explain. She has patience, special care with little ones who've been through difficulties. It's as if the pain she lived through became a strength to help other children. The school principal always praises her work. Julia still lives with me, and that's okay. Because of ADHD and everything she went through, she prefers the security of having her mother nearby. She's dated some young men, but nothing serious yet. She says she's focused on healing completely before building a family, and I respect her timeline. As for me, I continue making my homemade breads, which became famous in the neighborhood. Every Friday, I make a batch of cornbread that I sell to neighbors. The money helps with the budget and mainly gives me a good feeling of independence. I never want to be completely dependent on any man again. On free afternoons, I embroider tablecloths that I sell at the Saturday farmers market. It's delicate work that calms my mind and still earns some money. I learned to value these moments of peace, these simple things I couldn't properly enjoy before. My routine today is blessed with tranquility. I wake up early, make coffee for Julia and me. She goes to work. I take care of the house and my tasks. At night, we watch television together, talk about our day, about plans. These are conversations we never had before because fear always hung over our house. Julia was in therapy for 4.5 years. It was fundamental for her to understand that nothing she suffered was her fault. The therapist explained that victims of domestic violence always carry guilt that isn't theirs. Seeing my daughter free herself from that guilt too was one of the greatest joys of my life. Today, when I look back, I feel immense gratitude for having had courage that day in March. If I hadn't filmed, if I hadn't reported, Julia would still be suffering. Or worse, Robert could have killed her in one of those violent beatings. I learned that we can never accept violence as normal. No matter how difficult it is to report, no matter how much fear we have, it's always better than continuing to live in hell. Our dignity is worth more than any financial or social comfort. My relationship with Julia today is one of total complicity. We're mother and daughter, but also friends, companions in struggle. She invites me to watch movies on the couch, tells me about her students, asks my advice about clothes. These are simple gestures that didn't exist before because fear dominated our house. Financially, we live simply, but without need. Julia earns her teacher's aide salary, I have my breads and embroidery, and I still receive a small pension that the state pays me as compensation for what we went through. It's not much, but it's enough for 2 women who learned to value truly important things in life. And the important things, we discovered, aren't material possessions. They're the peace of sleeping calmly, the joy of waking without fear, the freedom to talk loudly inside the house, to laugh, to cry when needed, to simply be who we are. My dear ones, if you or someone you know is going through a situation similar to what I lived through, I want to say something very important. You're not alone. And especially, It's not your fault. For years, I blamed myself for not noticing earlier, for not acting sooner, for letting my daughter suffer so long. But I learned that fear paralyzes us in a way only those who live it understand. What's important isn't when you discover. What's important is that you discover and act. When I saw that terrible video, I understood I had to choose. Either I continued pretending not to see, or I saved my daughter. I chose to save my daughter, and it was the best decision of my life. Because today, 11 years later, I can look in the mirror and know I was the mother my Julia needed me to be. If you're experiencing violence at home, know that help exists. In any country in the world, there are authorities ready to protect you. In the United States, you can call 911 or seek help at your local police department. Look for local domestic violence resources and organizations that can help. I learned that violence is never normal, never education, never love. Love protects, doesn't hurt. Love cares, doesn't threaten. If someone hits you, humiliates you, threatens you, that's not love. It's violence, and violence is a crime everywhere. My life taught me we're stronger than we imagine. I, a simple housewife from Marietta, managed to confront a violent man and protect my daughter. If I could do it, anyone can. Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being afraid and acting anyway. Today, when I see Julia working with children, being affectionate, being free, I know all the pain was worth it. Because breaking the cycle of violence isn't just saving one person, it's saving future generations. My Julia will never raise a child in fear because she knows the difference between discipline and torture. For the mothers listening to me, observe your children. If they're always scared, always hurt, always sad, investigate. Sometimes violence is closer to us than we imagine. And remember, protecting our children is our greatest responsibility as mothers. And for you who made it this far, who heard this whole painful story, I have a special request. My dear warriors who had the courage and determination to watch this grandmother from Marietta's complete story, you who understood the importance of reporting domestic violence, help me spread this message of hope. Subscribe to and turn on notifications, because each subscription helps this story reach more people who need courage to act. Leave a comment below writing just courage. That way, I'll know you watched to the end and understood the message. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. Your action could save a life. Life is too precious to be wasted in fear. Choose freedom, choose peace, choose dignity, always.